Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining. This is Turn Your Repeatable Processes into Claude Skills. If you don't know me, my name is Anna Burgess Yang. I am a solopreneur operations expert. I work a lot with tools, automation, AI, and all the stuff that happens behind the scenes of a solo business. I'm also a freelance content marketer and journalist. I work with a lot of B2B SaaS companies and tech publications. And I'm also formerly a tech executive. I worked at a software company for a long time and was their product manager. So I have been dealing with tools and processes for most of my career. What we're going to cover today in this session is why create Claude skills, starting with basically what are they and what do they do and what can they do for you. Then we're going to take a look at some examples of skills and how you might use them in your own Claude. We're going to look step by step at how to create skills. I have a specific process that I follow every time I create a new skill, and I'm going to show that to you. I'm going to share some tips, some best practices for creating skills, and at the very end, we will have a Q&A. So to start with, we're going to look at why create Claude skills. Skills are repeatable processes in Claude. So you want to use a skill when you follow specific steps every time. What I mean by that is you want Claude to take the same sequence of actions. It's a little different than just opening a chat conversation or working in a project. You need skills so you don't have to re-explain the steps that you want Claude to follow or provide context. That information is all stored in the skills so you can work on the execution part of whatever it is you need to do. With skills, you can connect external tools. I have mine connected to Google Drive, Airtable, Notion, Kit, Zapier, a whole bunch others. There are so many connectors that you can add to your skills in Claude so that Claude can grab external data and bring it into the skill. Skills are different than projects in Claude. In projects, you have a series of instructions and you might have a lot of files that provide context. I use projects a lot. I might have 20 files attached to a project. But skills are context plus a process. So taking a specific file and reading it and analyzing it, doing something and giving you a result. That's a skill. So for example, here's a screenshot from my Claude showing a project. I actually have dozens of files attached to this project. But then a skill is a workflow that looks at Airtable and looks at a specific Google document and takes a specific action rather than pulling all of my files within a project's context. So here's an example of a skill that I use every single week, and it's a weekly check-in with myself. Since I'm running my own business, I kind of want to make sure that I'm staying on top of everything that I've committed to do. I have to-do lists, calendars, checklists, but I like the back and forth and basically answering to myself for what I said I would get done, and Claude facilitates this. So what my weekly check-in skill does, first it asks me to confirm the date. Claude often has no idea what day it is. So in order to make sure that it's following week by week, first I have to tell Claude today's date. Then Claude searches Notion, a specific spot in Notion, for my 4 most recent check-ins for context. I don't want it going back to the dawn of time, just the 4 most recent. Then it searches my calendar for upcoming events for the week, so it has this week's context. Then Claude asks me about my week. That's built into the skill. It says, hey, this is what you said you'd get done last week. How did that go? What do you plan to do this week? I can see this is on your calendar. And then at the end, it records my answers and writes a new page to Notion so that when I get to the next time I run this skill, now my 4 most recent check-ins have different pages and Claude gets new context. So it's doing this sequence of steps every single time when I call my weekly check-in. So the Claude instructions look like this. And honestly, I don't read them. When I show you how to set up a skill, I am not writing this. Claude is. And all I do is in a chat, just say, I need to do my weekly check in. Claude looks at the skill and knows what to do and says, let's start with confirming the date. And I say, that's what kicks off the skill. You could also use slash commands. So if you're in a chat, you can do a slash and say weekly check-in, or whatever the name of the skill is and do it that way, but you don't have to. You can use natural language and just say, I need to do this thing. And Claude knows to search skills and pull up the correct one. Where skills are stored. So in Claude Chat, over on the far left side of the screen, there's a little suitcase. And you just click on that, and then you see 2 things, both skills and connectors. If you click on the skills, you'll see a list of all of the skills that you have. I have, like I said, dozens. And then you'll also want to add any connectors. So as I mentioned, I use Airtable. I've got Canva connected. I've got my calendar, my Google Drive. You can click on the plus and select Browse Connectors and connect all kinds of tools. And so it depends on what you want Claude to have access to. That's completely up to you. So how do you create a skill? The first step is to notice that you have some type of repeatable process. Like you have to explain something to Claude over and over, and you have to say, look at this file, pull this thing out of my tool, look at my calendar, anything like that. That's a good candidate for a skill. Or you're copying and pasting context into new chats. So you started one chat and you're doing the same thing next week, and you're copying and pasting, you're doing the same thing over and over. That's a candidate for a skill. And you've got to be able to follow the same steps each time. Claude can handle different paths within a skill. So like if this happens, do this. If this happens, do this. But it's still a series of steps. So you've got to know that is happening within a skill. And another good candidate for a skill is that Claude needs to find specific context within a project. So you're working in a project, you've got dozens of files connected, but the skill would say, okay, for this thing we're working on, pull up these files. That would be a skill. The next thing you'll do is you'll work through it live. So before you ask Claude to create a skill, do the thing that you want it to do. So don't start with writing a skill. That's the last step, not the first step. You're going to follow the process in a chat conversation. So the first time I created my weekly check-in skill, I did my weekly check-in. I gave Claude the date. I said, go out and look at Notion. Ask me about last week. Ask me about this week. And at the end, I want you to create a new Notion doc. So you'll need to tell Claude to fetch any apps or files that you want to bring into the skill. Go out and look at my Google Drive. Go out and look at this folder. Go out and look at my calendar. And you need to tell Claude what you want the end result to be. Maybe it's a PDF, maybe it's a Google Doc, maybe it's a Notion document. What is the final thing that you want Claude to produce at the end, or what's the goal? Claude along the way will capture the specifics for you. You don't need to do this. But it needs to know what to grab each time. And it does that. I had these out of order. It has it by IDs. So files have an ID, or Notion has an ID. And along the way, Claude is capturing those things so that it knows to grab the same one next time. And it puts that into the skill. And you'll also want to specify filters like, I only want you to look at this particular folder, or this particular date, or this status in Notion, like something that's active versus inactive. Um, all of those you'll need to tell Claude along the way so it's pulling in the right things. Specific IDs that Claude is gathering makes your skill reliable. So that way it's not guessing each time. I have thousands of documents on my Google Drive. Claude doesn't need to look at all of them. When it builds the skill, it says, I need this file and this file and this file, and there's no guessing. When you've perfected that process and you've gotten to the point where it's the way you want and it's the output you want, now you tell Claude to write the skill for you. You can write them yourself, but Claude knows what Claude needs in order to do the same thing every time. So you get to the end of the process and you say, now turn this into a skill. Include anything that you have not covered. So say an example might be, don't guess. Claude is really good at guessing. Like if it doesn't have the information it needs, it might just make something up. And so you could say, don't move forward if I don't give you this. You must get this thing from me first. And any do not rules, like do not talk to me in a certain way. Do not produce this type of output. Do not do this. And so if you didn't do if your process did not cover those things, now is the time to tell Claude as you're building the skill. Because the first time you build it, it's not going to cover everything. More than likely, new scenarios will come up and you'll try to think through those at this point. And specify any confirmations you want. In my weekly check-in, I ask Claude to confirm the date with me first. That's a confirmation. The skill does not keep moving until I provide that. Sometimes Claude pulls data out of Airtable for me. And I say, confirm with me that you have the right thing before moving to the next step. And so Claude will say, hey, I found this. Is this the right one? And I say, yeah. And then we keep moving. Claude will then package the skill. That's the terminology Claude uses. It's going to package the skill. So you'll ask Claude to give you the skill file. And when it does, you'll click on Save Skill, and then it'll appear in the Customize area. This is exactly what it looks like. I say, Claude, make me a skill. Claude says, done. You get a file like this, and you click where it says Save Skill, and then it shows up in that Customize area, along with all of your other skills. As soon as you're done, you've created the skill, you've saved the skill, try it. Open a new chat, call that skill, and go through it and make sure that it's doing what you expected it to do, that Claude captured all of the steps correctly. So you'll either use the / command or just use natural language and say, Claude, I want to do my weekly check-in, or Claude, I want to, whatever the skill is, and prompt it. Make sure it's following those steps. If it doesn't, change it. Or it usually will capture it, but maybe something unexpected comes up. And then make changes over time. I adjust my skills constantly. Something new comes up. Something different has changed in my process. Something I didn't think about that I was like, oh, actually, I want Claude to handle something this way instead of another way. or you'll just find these edge cases that aren't kind of covered in your skills, especially if they're more complicated. Some of my skills follow like 7 or 8 steps, and they do a lot of things. And so all of a sudden it'll come up. I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that. Now I need to adjust it. And so you'll just say to Claude, hey, actually, we need a change. For example, I was working through um, a skill yesterday, and at the end, it presented me with a document, and the headers in the document are not bold. And for what I needed the headers to be bold. It was built into the skill. So I said, hey, Claude, actually, I need you to update this so that every time you produce this document, the headers are bold. So you just provide those new instructions, tell Claude to update the skill. Claude will give you the file and you need to select upload and replace. So it'll say, are you sure you want to replace the old skill with this updated skill? Yes, that's what you want to do. So now I'm going to show an actual demo, like what this looks like as I worked through the process and built a brand new skill. This is a video. I pre-recorded it because if you have used Claude, you know that Claude thinks a lot, and it doesn't make sense for you to sit here for 30 seconds while Claude thinks about something. So I went through the process, recorded it, but just cut out Claude's thinking time, so you don't have to stare at that, Benay. This is the process I followed to create new skills in Claude. First, I just work through a process. So in this example, I want to create a skill to help me create outlines for future webinars that I host. This is something that I have to do before every single webinar, and I have a specific template that I follow. I store my webinar data in Airtable, so I tell Claude to look there. And I have my webinar outline template attached from my Google Drive. All I'm doing at this point is going through the process that I want to follow every single time with Claude. So I've asked Claude to follow the format of my template and create a new outline. And this is the process I would follow with every single webinar. So I'm making sure that Claude follows my written instructions correctly. Claude presented me with a markdown file of the webinar outline, but actually what I want is a Google Doc because that's how I work in my Google Drive. And that's what I would want Claude to do in the future. So I give Claude some additional instructions to recreate this as a docx file so I can save it to my Google Drive instead. Now Claude's presented me with a docx file, which I then can click and save to my Google Drive. I would look over this and see if there was anything that I wanted Claude to change in future format. If so, I'd continue back and forth and have Claude regenerate this until it's exactly the way that I want it. So now that I have the process firmed up, I provide Claude with instructions of exactly what I want the skill to do, and Claude will write the skill for me. Once Claude has written the skill, it's presented to me. I scroll through the skill. Claude has saved things like the ID for information Claude needs from Airtable, the specific file that's needed from my Google Drive, ending with a docx file that I can save. Then I just select Save Skill. When I want to use the skill, I just tell Claude that I want to create a new outline for my next webinar. I don't even need to say skill. Claude knows to read the webinar outline creator skill, and then will take me through all of the steps outlined in the skill. When I recorded that, Claude created that markdown file, as you saw, and then I was like, no, don't do that, do a docx. And that's exactly what you want to have happen as you're creating this. You want to fix things in your process and make sure it's exactly right before you get to that step at the end and say, create a skill for me. And I've got a couple of tips for creating skills. One is to connect all your tools before you get started. So that's that connectors piece at the beginning. Make sure you've got them set up the way that you want. I connect everything. But within a connector, you can specify what you want it to have access to, whether you want it to ask you for permission each time it grabs data. Um, so you kind of need that to get started if you want Claude to grab external pieces. Um, as I mentioned before, add confirmation steps along the way. Have Claude present you with something before it moves on to the next thing, or or has it confirm something with you, so it doesn't just do all of the steps and then you get to the end and it's not what you wanted, even within a skill. And as I showed you, have Claude write the skill for you. You absolutely can write them yourself. You can write these files, markdown files, and upload them to the skills area. Um, you can get skills from other people. I've gotten skills that people have created the files, given them to me, and then I upload them to my system. Um, but really, you can let Claude do the writing. Claude knows what it needs and how to format those skills so that they're correct. So just do that. And then the other thing I do is have Claude actually save the data of my skill to Notion as a standard operating procedure. So it copies the entire text of that skill over to Notion so that I can search through it. The reason I go through that step is, what if someday I no longer use Claude? What if I move to a different system? What if Anthropic blows up? Don't know. And I want the process documented somewhere outside of Claude. That way it's mine. I have access to it. I can take it to a new tool. I can do something else with it. So that is built into all of my skills, that the last step is for Claude to write the documentation and save it to Notion for me. I have tons of free resources at products.annabeyang.com. I'm hosting another session, hopefully with better internet, on June 24th, the Solopreneur Tech Stack. And I'm also going to send you a link to my guide, Getting Started with Automation. So you can download that after the session if you want. All right, thanks everyone for joining.
You can check out written versions of the tutorials I create on my website, tinkeringwithideas.io. I also have a ton of free resources on Gumroad. I've got guides, worksheets, e-courses. You can check them all out at products.annabeyang.com.